of the hour here on France 24. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is the World This Week, and with us in the World This Week are Janine Di Giovanni, Paris-based reporter. Paris-based for how long?
8 years.
8 years
actually.
in Paris. There you go.
20 in London before that.
Oh, Paris is a great place to see the world. Your latest book, Ghost by Daylight, published by Knopf. Also with us, Amar Abed Rabo. He also makes Paris his home when he's not on the trot. Photojournalist, Syrian-born. Stefan de Vries of RTL4 in the Netherlands. And Judah Grunstein, World Politics Review. Welcome back to all of you. We're going to talk about two fellows who face the same challenge. And even though they're an ocean away, thanks to the magic of video conference calls, on Thursday, they were able to chat.
I admire the top man on your wager.
We will win, Mr. Obama. You and me.
So,
Together.
All right, speak for yourself. Maybe thinking Obama. That's because even though last week we were discussing a Sarkozy surge, the French president had climbed within 6 points in the runoff. This is one of the latest polls that's just come out. 3 polls have come out, and they tell roughly the same story. With 1 week to go in the campaign, socialist frontrunner François Hollande pulling ahead in the first round, and the gap once again widening for the May 6th runoff. Stéphane de Vries, that's got to hurt, those 3 polls saying the same thing.
Absolutely, but it's a trend we've been seeing for the last couple of months. François Hollande has been leading since he was elected in the primaries, the socialist primaries. There was a little surge of Nicolas Sarkozy in a couple of polls for the first round, but the trend in the...
But we were saying how he's more presidential after his handling of the Toulouse shooter drama and everything.
I think the Toulouse drama was a big failure. I mean, the mission was to capture the Mohamed Merah alive, and it didn't succeed, so it was a big failure. He really spinned it into a successful story, but it wasn't really. And since France was in war, nobody dared to ask the right questions, so it was a big mess.
We have maybe to tell that, you know, there was what people called in France the Sarko show, with all these Muslim activists arrested, with very tough guys like Robocop.
There were several sting operations.
Yeah, it
France.
was on all over. It was on CNN. It was all over the planet because it's very powerful images.
Yeah. Even on France 24.
Even on France 24. And then 3 days later, there was no image at all. But all these guys were back home, and none of them was even prosecuted or no charges or nothing. So probably one of the half points in the poll, or 1 point or something like that, come from here. I mean, people, you cannot fool them all the time, you know.
Yeah.
So it is Speedy Sarko who's a bit flaky to many voters?
Well, yeah, he kind of, to begin with, for a long time, Hollande was so far ahead because he was alone in the campaign. There was a point where people were pretty much giving up on Sarkozy, which helps because when expectations are low, it's easy to impress. He did have quite a bit of momentum after he declared his candidacy. He came out really swinging, very punchy, and then all of a sudden, in the last week or so, he just seems to have plateaued and lost ground. The thing is that what's really striking, I think, about this election, and it's the third one that I've seen since I've been in France, is how shallow the level of support and enthusiasm is for just about every single candidate. And so it doesn't surprise me that people are really looking for the next interesting thing. We saw Bayrou have a little spike.
Yeah.
We saw Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who's the far left candidate.
Right,
he's had a good couple of weeks. So each time someone does something new and shakes things up, people want to give them another look. The problem with polls in this kind of environment is that it's easy to say who you're going to vote for over the phone. If it's raining, people are on vacation on the first round of the voting. If it's raining, if it's not nice out, and they actually have to rearrange their schedule to go vote, and they're not really that excited about any of the candidates, I think that we could see some surprises.
You could see surprises. The turnout is, as you mentioned, one factor. And the polls don't always factor in, people don't always tell the truth. Le Monde, earlier this week, the French broadsheet of record, commissioning a poll that showed that voters under the age of 24 favor most of all the far-right candidate, Marine Le Pen, on 26%. ahead of Hollande on 25. Sarkozy far behind on 17, just ahead of the communist-backed candidate, Jean-Luc Mélenchon. So could there be surprises come election day?
I always think looking at elections, you have to, it's really a matter of trust. And for me, watching this French election, what I feel is that people don't trust Sarkozy anymore because he was elected. I remember 4 years ago going to the polling stations with a group of French friends who were very worked up and passionate that we're going to have
nearly 85% turnout in the first round.
Extraordinary. I remember that day. It was a beautiful spring day. Everyone was out at their local polls, and there was also this wonderful sense. It was very similar to the Obama elections 4 years ago, which I went back to America to vote for the very first time in my life because I had such passion for it. I don't find that now, and I think that what you were saying is absolutely true. I think people have nowhere to look. They don't particularly like Hollande, and I, as a journalist, I talk a lot to people, my mother-in-law, taxi drivers, the woman at the checkout counter at Monoprix. It's very interesting to hear what they think, and everyone says the same thing, which is that we don't want to go back to the socialism of the 70s, and they all mention the 75% tax, and I say, well, that's not going to affect you.
Right, explain what the 75% tax is.
The 75% tax, in fact, is only going to affect, they say, 3,500 people. The highest level tax that Hollande is proposing, that will be a tax on the wealthy. That will,
make over $1 million.
if you make over,
if you make over $1 million euros,
Yeah. So we are concerned.
It's only
Reporters don't have to
only
worry.
the income over 1 million that's taxed at 75%. It's not all of the income.
That's a proposal by the socialist candidate, François Hollande. Many see it as a way of outflanking the one guy who perhaps has stirred a bit of excitement, at least on the left, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, a former socialist who's now backed by the communists.
Yeah, he's a very interesting guy because he promises a lot of things which are completely humbug. These are fairy tales that he's telling, but the French people really believe him. And the strange thing is that nobody really tells the truth. The only person who is really telling the truth a little bit is François Bayrou. He was the
centrist candidate.
Yeah, the centrist candidate. He came into the third place in 5 years ago. He says some things that are true, but all the others don't tell the truth. And somebody who's telling fairy tales, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, he is very popular because the real truth is that as soon as the French president will be elected on May 7th, he has to go to Brussels because everything will be decided in Brussels and nothing will be decided in Paris. And nobody dares to say that, but that's the truth. And well, apparently the French don't want to hear the truth.
Even if Mélenchon is saying fairy tales, it's funny that Sarkozy is stealing some of his ideas, which is tax.
Ideas from anyone.
The thing is about Mélenchon is that if you like politics, you have to like this guy. He's good at what he does. He gets up in front of the crowd. But he's a great speaker. In interviews, he's testy, but there's always a smile at the end. There's a lot of things that are a lot less admirable in terms of some of his positions.
He's entertaining.
He's an entertainer. He's a political entertainer. The thing is, though, that we talked about the lack of foreign policy in this election. Generally, there are two things going on. Sarkozy, his two major achievements in foreign policy are getting France right back into the thick of things in Europe, which is now going down the drain. And the second is repairing ties with America and with NATO and with everything going on in Afghanistan and Libya and the Middle East in general. That's not a real good selling point either. Sarkozy is the one who invited Assad to the Champs-Élysées and Gaddafi. So there's a whole section, a whole part of his achievements or his accomplishments that he can't really talk about. Hollande doesn't really have a whole lot of credibility in terms of foreign affairs because he's never been in the government. So it really reduces the entire debate that we've seen to this sort of internal French debate.
And brings it back to what Janine was mentioning, which was taxing the rich. Speaking of taxing the rich, funny that we should be mentioning it. The President of the United States this week touting not once, but twice a minimum tax of 30% on those earning $1 million or more a year.
Do we want to keep giving those tax breaks to folks like me who don't need them, or to give them to Warren Buffett? He definitely doesn't need them. Or Bill Gates, he's already said, I don't need them. Going to the top 1% has climbed to levels we haven't seen since the 1920s. The folks who are benefiting from this are paying taxes at one of the lowest rates in 50 years.
And they followed it up this Friday with a statement from the White House. It says Barack Obama and his wife Michelle paid an effective federal tax rate of 20.5% on income of $789,000 in 2011. Now, I wonder, could this sudden urgency to pass this so-called Buffett rule have something to do with the man he's now almost certain to face in the fall?
I'm just really shocked. I mean, we've heard like this accusation that international diplomacy is very cynical, and now you're suggesting that politics is cynical too. Yeah, there's obviously the theme that I think they're going to trot out and that they're trotting out now, which is that Mitt Romney is out of touch with the average American.
14% tax he paid.
13.9.
13.9.
Yeah, well, again, it's how you calculate it, what the taxed income was. He didn't break any rules, but again, there's people like Warren Buffett who are saying, look, I can get away with these rules. They actually benefit me, and I don't need them. And there are people who aren't saying that. But yeah, there's definitely going to be part of the theme of the Obama campaign that this guy has maybe not, that he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, that it's never left his mouth, and that in tough times when people are really sacrificing and tightening their belts, who do you want in charge? Do you want someone who doesn't know what that's like, or do you want someone who?
Janine, the fact that Rick Santorum dropped or suspended, he's probably going to drop out of the race this week. Does that change things?
I think it's going to have to consolidate the Republican Party, because at the moment they're all self-imploding all over the place. And I mean, it's great for the Democrats, it's great for Obama, but on the other hand, I think this whole wealth tax issue this week has been I think it's really caught the nerve in America, because I think people, if you live in France, you pay a lot of tax, but you get good schools, you get good roads, you get good health care. I've lived in America, France, and Britain, all countries where you do pay high taxes. America, you don't get anything. You don't get health care. You don't get good schools. So I think this is something that Obama is really going to touch a nerve of a lot of people. And Warren Buffett has said, I pay more tax than my secretary. So he's actually kind of come out with the emperor's not wearing any clothes. What is it? The emperor without clothes, saying what no one has wanted to say for all these years, that this has to change.
All right, so this tax the rich mantra on the one side, the Republican primaries, the debate had been a lot about social issues, values, things like abortion. How about the general election? Let's hear what Mitt Romney has to say about that.
As the president says, and as I say, we're at a defining time. And the question is, are we going to turn left and become like Europe? Or are we instead going to restore the principles that made us who we are?
Just to become like Europe. Well, Stefan de Vries.
Seems like a paradise to me. But
by the way, there's one socialist government, there's one leftist government in all of Europe at this point.
By the way, The Economist predicting a hardball campaign. Nasty, it says in its lead editorial, regretting that Obama's bashing the rich, what the magazine calls gimmicks, like the Buffett rule. So not everyone a fan of his proposal. Before we go, in this era of the 24-hour news channel, the whole planet is marking the 100th anniversary of what you could call the first disaster to play out on mass media. If Vietnam was the first war to be televised, the sinking of the Titanic on its maiden voyage, April the 14th, 1912, the first drama of its kind to be followed on radio, with newspapers adapting, even back then, to the circumstances to cover the story.
They used to have chalkboards outside the newspapers, and men would go out with paintbrushes and white paint and paint across the black board the latest news. And there was one I have in one of my books that shows the names that were coming, Countess of Roth and Ismay and Widener, all the names that became common currency that night being chalked up for people to see. That was sort of the CNN news window of the time.
Right, the CNN news window of the time. Amar Abed Rabo, that catastrophe, again, 100 years ago, and yet we're still talking about it.
Yeah, it's. I think it's maybe because of the movies, maybe because of the novels. I mean, there are probably other stories like the Hindenburg or or catastrophes like that would be as shocking. I was thinking about it on coming. What would be of today that maybe people would talk about in 100 years? It's not easy to tell. Maybe, I mean, now you see people who are totally crazed by 1 hour or 2 hours Facebook or Twitter catastrophe. I mean, it doesn't work anymore, and people think they're going to die. I mean, so, and all over the world.
I think there are two things. The first thing is that there was this incredible hubris. This was the unsinkable ship. It was this sort of culmination. Yeah. It was the human arrogance that we can dominate nature and create something that even nature can't destroy. And the second thing is that it was on its first voyage. I mean, I think that if the Titanic had done 15 or 20 voyages across the ocean, and the sort of excitement had died down, and then there was some sort of tragedy, it would have been tragic, but I don't think it would have had that resonance. It was the sense that they said it was unsinkable, and on its very first voyage, it didn't even reach port. There's something pretty incredible about that combination.
Does that still resonate with you as well, Stefan?
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. And this week was what was even more fascinating that, well, they say truth is always stranger than fiction. Actually, there were a lot of people tweeting, young people, that because of the new release of the Titanic movie, they realized that this was a real-life event. So a lot of people in the world don't even realize that this really happened because they only know it from the movie. So
I think there's this gruesome fascination with catastrophes now, and I agree with both you that it's to do with films and with Hollywood making it into something, you know, a romantic story with Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio. But I mean, for instance, Chernobyl. That was a disaster, that was an absolute catastrophe, and it doesn't have the same kind of resonance as the Titanic. So I think Hollywood has a lot to answer for.
All right.
And also in everyday saying, you know, when people say they were dancing on the floor of the Titanic, and so we compare it with many things, like with what's happening with politics, with the crisis in Europe, with Syria, maybe, I don't know. I mean, a lot of things relate to Titanic.
And we'll be back next week to see how the high and mighty have fallen. Amar Abed Rabo, I want to thank you. I want to thank Judah Grunstein, Stefan de Vries, and also Janine Di Giovanni. Thank you for being with us here in The World This Week. Stay with us. Coming up next, it's time for business. Marcus Carlson will tell us about how the mighty have fallen at the Milan stock market.